Welcome to a Moment in Time podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Freya.
For over 800 years, knights and kings and archaeologists have scoured the earth looking for a golden chalice that held the blood of Christ. But what if I told you the Holy Grail actually started out as a magical soup bowl?
I mean, it sounds totally absurd when you say it out loud like that, but, well, when you actually pull back the layers of history, the evolution of this artifact is, infinitely more fascinating than just a simple treasure hunt.
Right, and that is exactly what we are doing today. We are taking a deep dive into one of the most enduring mysteries in human history.
Absolutely. We've got a fantastic stack of sources today, everything from theological journals to historical analyses of Byzantine silver and even deep dives into Celtic mythology.
Yeah, so our mission here is to separate fact from fiction. We are going to deconstruct the modern pop culture conspiracies, trace the true literary origins of the Grail, and explore the surprising, tangible historical artifacts that actually fueled these legends. You are going to love where this goes.
But to find the real Grail, though, we first have to clear away a massive amount of modern debris.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, specifically, we have to deconstruct the massive cultural impact of the Da Vinci Code.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I know some people think pop culture conspiracies are just harmless fun, right?
Yeah.
But it's essentially like looking at clouds. If someone points to a cloud and tells you it looks exactly like a rabbit, suddenly that is all you can see. You cannot unsee the rabbit.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah, and Dan Brown did that with human history, right? He basically convinced millions of people that a secret society has been hiding the true nature of the Grail for millennia.
Exactly. Which brings us to the foundational premise of that modern myth, which is the Priory of Zion. The claim in the book is that this was an ancient, real European secret society guarding the bloodline of Jesus.
Right, with members like Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton.
Yeah, supposedly, and complete with hidden historical documents discovered in Paris. But when you look at the actual historical record, the entire thing just completely unravels. It was a mid-20th century hoax.
Wait, a hoax from the 20th century?
Right.
Not ancient at all.
Not even slightly. The Priory of Zion was just a tiny splinter social club created in 1956 by a man named Pierre Plantard.
Okay, so who was this guy?
He was a right-wing political figure with, get this, a criminal record for fraud, and those ancient documents supposedly proving the bloodline, Plantard literally forged them himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he fabricated a genealogy, named it Le Dossier Secrets, and then he physically snuck the forged parchments into the French National Library so that researchers would magically discover them later.
Wait, are you serious? So people found these supposedly ancient documents, but they were essentially just 1950s fan fiction that a con artist literally smuggled into a real library?
That is exactly what happened.
That completely invalidates the central plot of the whole conspiracy. But the book also makes these massive historical claims about early Christianity, too. Like, it leans heavily on the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD.
Right, the claim that the Roman Emperor Constantine held a narrow, highly political vote to suddenly deify Jesus.
Yeah, like Jesus was supposedly just considered a mortal prophet before that specific day.
Well, the theological and historical records completely refute that narrative. The vote at the Council of Nicaea was not some nail-biting political maneuver.
It wasn't a close vote.
No, it was a landslide. Out of 318 bishops present, only 2 actually dissented.
Wow, just 2.
Just 2. And more importantly, they were not inventing a new concept. They were formally clarifying beliefs that were already firmly established in the first century.
Like hundreds of years before Constantine was even born.
Exactly. The core tenets of the faith were already in place. Nicaea was basically just the bureaucratic stamp of approval.
We have to talk about the painting, though. Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper.
Yeah.
Because this is the biggest rabbit in the cloud moment for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
The claim is that the figure sitting to the right of Jesus isn't John the Apostle, but Mary Magdalene, right?
Right.
And that she herself is the Holy Grail. And honestly, when you look at the flowing hair and the delicate, kind of effeminate features of that figure, I mean, it's incredibly easy to see why people buy into it.
It really is. What's fascinating here is how easily a modern thriller can just overwrite centuries of established art history in the public's mind.
And so it definitely is John the Apostle.
Without a doubt. If you look at Da Vinci's broader body of work, you see a really clear pattern. He frequently painted young men with highly feminine, idealized features.
What, really? Like who?
Well, his painting of St. John the Baptist is a textbook example of this exact same artistic style.
Oh, I see. Plus, if you look closely at the details of the Last Supper, the sources point out that Leonardo actually did encode a secret message, just not the one that conspiracies claim.
Right. He painted a psychological drama.
Yeah, you can see Peter holding a knife hidden behind his back, which directly foreshadows the violence he commits in the garden later that night. And you see Judas recoiling, clutching a small bag of silver.
Exactly. And regarding the missing Holy Grail on the table, which the conspiracy claims proves Mary Magdalene is the actual vessel, if you actually just look at the painting, there is no missing cup.
Right, everyone at the table just has a standard drinking glass.
Yeah, Jesus has a cup right next to his hand. Leonardo painted a normal meal, not a scavenger hunt.
So, if the Grail isn't Mary Magdalene, and it wasn't guarded by a fraudulent 1950s secret society, where does the very idea of a Holy Grail actually come from? Because, I mean, a cup and a secret bloodline are two entirely different things.
To find the true origin, we actually have to leave the ancient Middle East entirely and look at medieval Europe.
Okay, color me intrigued.
So the word Grail in the Middle Ages originally had no sacred connotation whatsoever. It was just an old French word for a large, flat serving platter.
Wait, so are you telling me the Holy Grail started out basically as a magical soup bowl before it got a Christian makeover?
Pretty much. It was a common everyday piece of tableware for rich households.
So how does a flat serving platter somehow transform into the most sought-after holy relic in Christendom?
It starts at the end of the 12th century with a French poet named Chrétien de Troyes. He wrote the very first Grail romance, a story called Percival. And in his narrative, the Grail makes an appearance. It's this highly mysterious, glowing, golden vessel that carries a single mass wafer and sustains a wounded king.
But he doesn't call it the cup of Christ.
No, Chrétien never explicitly calls it that. It's simply a magical object in a knightly adventure.
And this is where the pagan roots come in, right? Because a glowing, magical vessel that provides endless sustenance sounds exactly like Celtic mythology.
You've hit the nail on the head. Celtic myths are filled with magical vessels. The sources mention the cauldron of Dagda, which was said to provide a literally endless supply of food to worthy men.
Right, an endless feast.
And you also have the cauldron of Nereus, which was a mystical vessel associated with rebirth and healing. And these cauldrons were highly selective. They tested the purity of the user.
So Chrétien de Troyes essentially took these ancient pagan Celtic symbols of abundance and dropped them into a contemporary story about medieval knights. But he just writes a cool fantasy novel borrowing pagan tropes. When does this serving platter actually get its Christian makeover and become the Holy Grail?
That literary shift happens in the early 13th century, thanks to another writer named Robert de Boron.
Okay, what did he do?
He realized the incredible narrative potential of this object and completely redefined it. He intentionally took these popular Celtic myths about magical cauldrons and just overlaid them with heavy Christian theology.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, Robert de Boron is the one who wrote that the Grail was specifically the cup used at the Last Supper, and that it was later used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch the physical blood of Christ at the crucifixion.
Wow. So Robert de Boron basically pulled off the ultimate literary rebrand. He took a pagan symbol of endless food, merged it with Christian salvation, and created a myth so potent that it just jumped off the page.
It really did.
He didn't just write a story, he essentially drew a treasure map. And, once people truly believed this cup existed, it was only a matter of time before someone claimed to have dug it up. Which brings us out of the realm of poetry and into the real world.
Welcome to the era of the educated adventurer. Because once the legend was codified, the psychological hunger for a physical relic just drove people to the dirt.
So what does this all mean for actual archaeology?
Well, a perfect example of this phenomenon is the Great Chalice of Antioch.
Oh, I find this story so fascinating. Tell them about the well.
So around 1908, workers are digging in a well in Syria near Antioch, and they unearth this stunning, intricate silver object. And it eventually makes its way to a Swedish-American antiquarian named Gustavus Eisen.
Right, and he doesn't just quietly study it, does he?
Not at all. He takes it on a massive promotional tour. He brought it to the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, heavily hinting to millions of people that this was the actual Holy Grail.
And physically, it looked exactly like what the public wanted the Grail to look like.
It really did. It features a plain, unadorned inner cup, encased in this highly elaborate, gilded outer shell, showing figures of Christ and his disciples surrounded by grapevines.
It looked like a humble cup that had been enshrined by later generations.
Exactly.
But when modern experts actually got their hands on it, the cinematic dream died quickly, right?
Unfortunately, yes. An Oxford specialist named Marlia Mandel Mango analyzed it and concluded it wasn't a first-century drinking cup at all.
What was it?
It was a 6th-century Byzantine liturgical lamp.
A lamp. Not a cup, a lamp.
Yes, which makes perfect sense when you understand how those lamps function.
Yeah.
They were standing vessels meant to hold oil. So if you take a decorative standing oil lamp and view it entirely out of context, it looks identical to a large chalice.
Wow. It's a beautiful historical artifact, but it was basically used to light a church, not to serve wine at the Last Supper.
Right.
It really highlights this desperate psychological need we have to touch the myth. Like, we want the story to be real so badly that we will project our desires onto a 6th century lamp.
Yep.
And you really cannot talk about this 20th century hunger for the Grail without talking about how Hollywood cemented this image for us. I mean, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is basically the ultimate Grail text for modern audiences.
Oh, for sure. And the film brilliantly captures the tension between those ornate, jewel-encrusted chalices like the one from Antioch and the reality of a first-century carpenter.
Right. When Indiana Jones has to choose the true Grail, he ignores the shimmering gold and picks the simple earthenware cup.
The cup of a carpenter?
Exactly. But the movie also taps into a much older, deeper mythological rule from those original Celtic legends we talked about.
How so?
There is a specific boundary presented in the film. The quote is, "Contact is permitted, but possession is not." The villain, Elsa, crosses that boundary. She tries to take the Grail out of the sanctuary.
Right. She tries to possess the divine power for herself.
Yes, and it literally causes the earth to collapse around her.
Because it acts as the ultimate test. The Grail in literature and in that film isn't just an object to be found. It is a mirror that tests the purity and the motives of the seeker. You can experience its grace, but the moment you try to own it, you destroy yourself.
Okay, so we've established that the Last Supper cup almost certainly didn't survive antiquity. The physical cups people dug up were medieval lamps, and the rest is basically beautiful poetry and movie props. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh boy, here we go.
A cup and a blanket are two entirely different shapes. It's a massive leap for a medieval poet to make unless there was a massive misunderstanding. Are the sources actually suggesting that the Holy Grail wasn't a cup at all, but a burial cloth?
This is where we have to look at a highly specific theory presented by a researcher named Richard B. Sorensen. And just to be clear for everyone listening, we are going to lay out his analysis impartially.
Right. We are endorsing this as absolute religious truth.
Exactly. We're simply exploring the historical and forensic connections he's making in the source material. So, Sorensen's theory argues that medieval knights were looking for a real object containing the blood of Christ, but because of evolving translations in literature, they just got the physical shape of the object wrong.
Okay, walk me through the timeline of that. How does a burial shroud turn into a cup in the minds of medieval Europe?
It starts with the movement of the Shroud of Turin itself. The shroud is a large linen cloth bearing the faint brownish image of a crucified man. Historically, it was kept in the city of Edessa and then brought to Constantinople in 944 AD.
Where it was housed in the imperial treasury, right?
Yes, and we have explicit records of crusaders from Europe seeing the shroud there in 1204, right before those same crusaders brutally sacked the city and looted its relics.
Okay, and immediately following that 1204 sack of Constantinople, suddenly the Grail romances explode in popularity across Europe.
The timing there is wild, isn't it?
It is. It's as if these knights came back whispering about a sacred, hidden object bearing the physical blood of Christ, and the poets, who had never actually seen it, just ran with the concept.
That is exactly his argument. And there's a fascinating linguistic component that bridges the gap, too. Later writers, like Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century, referred to the object as the sangreal.
Oh, okay, sangreal.
Right. And depending on where you split that word, sangreal translates to Holy Grail. But if you split it as sangreal, it translates to royal blood.
Oh, wow. So a holy cup or the royal blood itself?
Exactly. That double meaning allows for a massive shift in interpretation.
Now, if you are listening to this and rolling your eyes because you remember the Shroud of Turin being definitively debunked in the 1980s as a medieval painting, stick with us. Because the forensic arguments presented in these sources are intense.
They really are.
What actual evidence connects this specific cloth to the 1st century?
There are several unique forensic claims that challenge the idea of a medieval forgery. First, The source notes that the image on the cloth encodes 3D spatial data, which is a concept known as topographical foreshortening.
Meaning what, exactly? Like a topographical map?
Essentially, yes. A normal painting is flat. But when scientists analyzed the shroud, they found that the density of the image changes based on the precise distance the cloth would have rested from a three-dimensional human body.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The parts of the cloth that touch the nose are darker than the parts that hovered over the eye sockets. You cannot paint topographical data into a flat piece of linen.
That is incredible.
Furthermore, when the shroud was first photographed in 1898 by a man named Seconda, looking at the photographic negative revealed a perfect, positive, highly detailed image of a man.
So the cloth itself behaves like a photographic negative.
Exactly, a concept utterly unknown to a medieval forger.
And the anatomical details challenge medieval art completely too, right? Because look at how the crucifixion is depicted in the Middle Ages. Art always shows nails driven right through the center of the palms.
Right, but the shroud shows the wounds in the wrists. Specifically, an area anatomically known as the space of decode.
Which is forensically vital.
Very much so. Modern pathologists have demonstrated that a nail driven through the fleshy palm of the hand cannot support the weight of a human body. The flesh would simply tear right through.
Ah, I see.
However, a nail driven through the space of decode in the wrist locks solidly into the bones and ligaments, supporting the weight perfectly. A medieval artist wouldn't know the biomechanics of Roman crucifixion, and they certainly wouldn't intentionally correct centuries of established artistic tradition to paint the wrists. Plus, the blood patterns actually match the sudarium of Oviedo, which is another ancient relic.
But I have to push back here, because this is where the skepticism usually comes in. What about the red pigment? Walter Macron famously examined the shroud and declared he found paint, proving it was a painted forgery.
It's totally essential to address the skeptics. Macron did find microscopic traces of pigment. However, the source rebuts this by explaining the mechanism of a practice known as creating a brandum.
A brandum? What is that?
In the Middle Ages, when artists painted replicas or true copies of the shroud, those painted canvases were physically laid directly on top of the original shroud to sanctify them.
Oh, so they pressed wet or flaky paint against the real thing.
Right. Doing this repeatedly over centuries naturally transferred loose pigment flakes onto the ancient linen. But when you look at the core image forming the man on the shroud, there are no brushstrokes, no cementing of fibers, and no capillary action of paint soaking into the threads.
So the paint is just sitting on top.
The image itself rests only on the topmost microscopic fibrils.
Okay, but what about the carbon-14 dating from 1988? That was a massive global news story. Scientists cut a piece off, tested it, and dated it straight to the Middle Ages. That seems mathematically definitive.
It definitely seemed definitive at the time. But a scientist named Raymond Rogers, who was actually part of the original scientific team that studied the shroud, later published peer-reviewed findings explaining the flaw in that 1988 test.
What was the flaw?
The scientists in 1988 were only allowed to cut a tiny sample from the very outside edge of the cloth, the corner that had been handled by crowds for centuries.
The most contaminated part of the entire artifact.
Worse than contaminated, actually. The shroud survived a major fire in 1532. Rogers discovered that the specific edge they cut for the 1988 test had been repaired by nuns after that fire.
Wait, repaired how?
These nuns essentially wove new 16th century dyed cotton into the ancient linen to seamlessly patch the damage. The chemical composition of the sample tested didn't match the main body of the shroud at all.
Wait, so if they dated a patched corner, the whole test is compromised. When the scientists in 1988 burned that sample, they were measuring the radioactive decay of the newer medieval thread.
Which completely threw off the date of the original cloth. According to this analysis, yes. The 1988 test successfully dated the medieval repair work, but told us absolutely nothing about the age of the original artifact.
That completely flips the narrative.
It really does.
So if we pull all the way back and look at the massive journey we just took, we started by clearing away the modern fog of the Da Vinci Code, which tried to convince us the Grail was a hidden bloodline.
Right.
Then we traced the literature back to Chrétien de Troyes, who lifted pagan Celtic cauldrons of endless food and dropped them into medieval romances. We looked at the sheer psychological fever that had antiquarians promoting a 6th century Byzantine oil lamp as the cup of Christ.
And finally, We end up looking at a blood-stained burial shroud bearing a 3D negative image, which might just be the physical, historical origin of the entire legend.
It is a journey that reveals just as much about the mechanics of human psychology as it does about archaeology or history.
Which always brings us back to the core question, right? Why do you, the listener, actually care about this? Why does a modern person in the 21st century still feel the pull of a medieval legend?
I think it's because humanity has this deep, incredibly enduring desire to literally touch the divine. We are physical creatures. We don't just want philosophy. We want physical proof of our spiritual beliefs.
We want a map with a red X on it.
Exactly. Whether it's a golden cup holding the promise of eternal life or an ancient linen cloth holding an impossible image, these objects act as mirrors. They reflect our own values, our own faith, and our desperate need to connect with something much larger than ourselves.
And if we look at the broader picture, the Grail stories consistently teach us one vital, unchanging lesson across centuries of literature.
Which is?
True power cannot be possessed. It can only be experienced. The knights of medieval literature learned that. Pop culture icons like Indiana Jones learned that. The moment you try to lock the divine in a display case, you lose it.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. If the myth of the Grail tests the purity of the seeker, and if trying to own it only brings destruction, well, then perhaps the simple fact that we have never definitively found it isn't a failure of archaeology at all.
Right.
Perhaps the ongoing, unending search for the Grail is exactly the point. We always thought we needed a map to find the treasure, but maybe the human mind is simply hardwired for the quest. The quest itself is the treasure.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the legend, the history, and the enduring mystery of the Holy Grail.
That wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for watching A Moment in Time podcast.